There is a cost of business crisis. There is a cost of living crisis. Cost of living crisis is very much reported as it should be. There's lots of discussion about helping out the sector, helping out households who are struggling. There's less so, though, reported on the business sector and all the factors that are contributing to challenges to household budgets, but to putting that squeeze on the finances, etc., tends to be ignored when it comes to businesses, whatever size and complexity. In this broadcast, I'm going to look at the cost of business crisis. I'm going to go through why it's happening. Understanding why it's happening helps us to deal with it. We're going to be looking at some of the key components of costs that are presenting big challenges for businesses. And more importantly, what can we do as business owners to try and combat, mitigate and deal with those challenges in front of us? So folks, before we do that, it only seems right and proper that we have a little warm the blood music. Good morning, folks. So my name is Mahmood Reza. I am an accountant. Thank you very much. I am also the founder of Numbers Know How. My background is in accountancy education. I'm also the proud author of the book I Hate Numbers, which, according to my opinion and many of those who read it, is a must read for businesses. It's not just about numbers, but it's about ways to deal with and cope with all those different machinations and things that go on in our business. The purpose of this particular broadcast, as in all the content that I try to produce, is to help you and your business create more profits, save money, save time and tax, reduce the battles that go on between your ears, and make them such that you have more victories than you do have losses. Let's crack on with today's broadcast. Now, if you're hopping on live, thank you very much for your company. If you're coming across this later on, if you put in that hashtag replay, if you have a comment to make, if you want something to contribute to this particular broadcast, then please put those comments in, put hashtag replay. I always check the comments that come through and will respond to them accordingly. Now, cost of living crisis is a term that's pretty much seeped into the UK vocabulary, and it's something that affects the rest of the world here. What's less publicised, what's less talked about, is what that impact is on businesses. Now, in terms of anything that happens that's classified as a crisis, there are ways to actually deal with that. There are ways that we can cope with that. And what I'm going to try and do through this broadcast here is to make the comments very practical and less of an academic framework. I think it's worthwhile, before we look at how do we deal with this here, is to understand what is meant by this cost of business crisis, what the contributory factors behind them have been. And that way, once we've got a better understanding of what's causing something, it's always much easier as a business owner, as a business, to actually then come up with tactics, to come up with a plan and an approach as to how to tackle it as well. Now, cost of living crisis has come about, and it's pretty much those same contributory factors that's impacted on businesses. Is if we have to go back and look over the last couple of years. Now, in the last couple of years, COVID has been an issue, and it's had a massive impact on the world, not just from a health perspective and how governments are treating it. Your views on that are particularly not particularly pertinent on this comment, but what we do know is it's caused businesses to shut down. And the way I would look at it is, if you imagine you have a car and you put it away in storage in a garage and you leave it alone for a couple of years, and then you go back to it after a couple of years, it's likely that car will not start first time round. It's likely some parts and some components will have seized up. It's likely that you might have to buy spare component parts to get that car functioning again. It's likely that car will not be as efficient and ready to go as if it was in regular use. And that is pretty much an overview, a symbolic overview of what the economy has been like and what it's been like for businesses. So imagine businesses that have had periods of shutdown, and they've say shut down or reduce certainly their activity. more specifically in terms of what I call in-person. So if your business is not a work from home business, what's happened is there's been less traffic, less movement. You've had issues with staff retention. Some staff would have gone off into different industries. You've had a shutdown in demand, and therefore what you've had to do is to take action accordingly. Now, as the economy reawakens, what happens is it's a bit like starting the car, and it will take time for things like supply chains to come back into full activity. Component costs such as energy have disproportionately gone up, and it's not just because effectively of recent war in Ukraine. That's certainly be a contributory factor, but in my opinion it's been just that economy reawakening, and effectively all the elements that are in the full movement here, from shipping costs, distribution costs, the acquisition of raw materials, getting good quality labour, all those have conspired to put pressures on. Inflation in the UK has just topped 10% in the last week or two. And the reason for me to think about all those major events, and if we do then factor in like the war in Ukraine, even though the UK economy doesn't necessarily consume a lot of Russian oil and gas, those countries that do rely on it have had to go to other countries to actually obtain their supplies, and therefore price pressures will increase. Also, it's got to be remembered, folks, here that oil, obviously we recognise it mostly for fuel, for energy that we use it from, but oil has a very, very wide user base, and it's used from multiple products here, from health, your smartphones, from asphalt on the roads, plastics and the like here. So that cost pressure permeates through pretty much most things that we buy into. Now, the reason for being aware of that is not to make any sort of political or business point here, but it's to say all those events that have occurred have put cost pressures up there. Inflation has gone up accordingly. Inflation, that measure of the movement of a basket of goods, it's likely to go up slightly more in my opinion. But it's, for me, when I say transitory, in the greater scheme of things in the business world here, in the greater thing as economies, it's likely to last for about another year, maybe a year and a half. But you will then see those cost pressures relax a little bit. When some degree of whatever it's called normality comes back to being, those cost pressures will minimise, they'll reduce. Energy costs are likely to reduce as well. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, but having been in business for over 27 plus years, having been involved in the world of business for about 40 years here, I've seen, a cycle of events that have occurred over the last 30, 40 years here. So in my humble opinion, having seen it before, things will change as time goes on. As an economy, as businesses, we are used to those extremes, those extreme pressure points here. Businesses do survive, and not all businesses will be affected to the same magnitude. Now, it's important to know this, because when we deal with any crisis, and it's undeniable there is a cost of business crisis, one factor alone, energy costs, certainly based on my own experience, the experience of my clients here, are factored in to go up by a magnitude of 400 to 500%. For many businesses that are not work from home businesses, those price increases have already taken effect, and bills have gone up by a magnitude of 300%, and their forecasts to go up even more. Certainly coming up to winter time, that could be quite a pressure point there as well. So energy, which is a key component of many businesses, we need electricity to power all the devices we have, to heat our offices. We're going to use them in our manufacturing processes. So energy is a key major component here. And later on in this broadcast, folks, I'm going to focus particularly on energy and the things that we can do to deal with them. But I want to present a framework of how we can cope with these big pressure on costs. So understanding where we are is really vital before we take any action. And it's not just for cost pressures here. If you as a business owner understand where you are, if you understand the issues, and we're going to boil in a couple of other factors in a few moments here, it's much easier then to deal with that. The key thing in all of these things here, and I can remember going back a couple of years when COVID first kicked in and pretty much things hit the fan, so to speak. There was panic, there was lots of people being uncertain, and I remember very clearly when I was starting to do my own particular first lot of broadcasts here, that calm and resilience are your best friends. So with that in mind, any action that you take, you've got to do certain things before you take any action. Those things you've got to do is to try as far as possible is to remain calm and not to panic. Making decisions under panic, making decisions when you haven't got good information to make those decisions on, could be very catastrophic for your business. I would certainly not recommend anybody to suddenly say, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and of a major scale, until you've actually evaluated what the impact will be. You've got to stay calm as best you can, and you've got to be resilient. And the one key element of a practical tool that I would recommend, whatever the circumstances we find our economic climate in, is you must do a financial plan. A financial plan, a financial route map, where you look through the windscreen of your business, is absolutely critical before we make any key decisions in our business. A financial plan, a financial story plan, a cash flow plan, if you like, for me, is a critical document, whatever the state of your business, whatever's going on in your business here. If the landscape is relatively calm and it doesn't look too choppy and turbulent, you do a financial plan. If it looks very rosy and optimistic, you do a financial plan. If it's going to be clench your buttocks time and things are going to get a bit, shall we say, rocky, so to speak, and turbulent, you do a financial plan. If there's one thing I would recommend to any business, art, social enterprise, whatever shape and size you are, you must do a financial plan. Not to do one, by the way, in my opinion, folks, is irresponsible, not just to yourself, but to all those people who might rely on you for your survival and prosperity, from your staff, your suppliers, your team. So there, for me, it's a real critical document. It's a real critical process to go through. Later on in the comments, I'll drop a couple of links here, by the way, if you're interested, just so you can actually have a look around and grab some extra resources. By all means, check out the I Hate Numbers website and Numbers Know-How here, and you'll see some tools and resources there that will be very useful for you. So, in terms of how we feel, resilience is the absolutely key thing here. We've got to remain optimistic, and I'm not saying it's rosy out there, but panic, a fear, anxiety will creep in, and that will distort your decision making, and that's not what you want when you're at the pivot of your business. What else do we need to think about? Well, we then need to think about what are the key constituent elements that are where those cost pressures are, and they are typically energy costs. And energy, for me, again, I think it's going to have a bigger impact in terms of those businesses that don't work from home. And the biggest reason is there is no energy cap. So householders, even though the cap has gone up in value, there is no energy cap for businesses that do not work from home. If you work from home, it's your household, you're going to get an energy cap. And again, I'm not saying you're going to be immune to any of those cost pressures, but it's going to be less severe than for those people who've got venues, manufacturing units, premises, even if they occupy service buildings. For myself, my business is based in an office. I've got a team of 8 people that's based within the environment, and therefore for me, having energy, having electricity coming to power that is going to have more of an impact for my business than it would be if I was working from home. There is no cap, and there's no sign at the moment of the government stepping in to actually support those businesses that are not working from home businesses. So having said that, what can we actually do? So critically, there's a few things we also need to remember, and we have in our toolkit, in our minds, as well as a practical sense. All the changes that we're looking to make, okay, we do not want to go slash and burn. We do not want to go cut costs willy-nilly. The two ways that we can look at things is, first of all, look at the top number, and that's obviously look at the pricing that you're charging your customers and your clients. By all means, it should be a natural thing anyhow that you should always do a price review to see whether your price that you're charging for your customers is where you want it to be. You know, whether you do it on a value for money proposition, whether you just do it on a cost recovery position, but always reviewing pricing should be a natural part of your business cycle. Some businesses are just saying, okay, whatever the cost increases and pressures we're facing, we're going to pass those on to our client base. Now that's fine if you can do that, but that's going to have a detrimental effect potentially on your client base. Some of your customers may not be able to bear it. Some of your customers may not be able to afford to absorb those cost increases here, and some of those customers might decide to go elsewhere. Remember, every business that's operating is going to be interconnected, whether you're B2B or B2C. There's an interconnection of what you do and the behaviour of your customer. So by all means, pricing is one of those things. Many of our clients, they're doing a mixture. Some will be absorbing some of that cost. If not, some of it will be absorbing some of it. Some of the pain is going to be shared. But whatever you do, you need to understand what the impact is going to be on your bottom line, your cash flow, and your ability to sustain that as well. So pricing is certainly one angle. The other angle is to then look at your cost base. And before you do what I call a slash and burn, and pretty much these are the same principles that would have been applied back in 2020 when effectively the pandemic took its hold and it basically tightened the noose around business activity, is have a look at your cost base, and before you start slashing and burning, ask some general questions. So as you explore your costs, you're asking yourself, what value does it contribute to my business? So it's not just a question of switching suppliers. Does it contribute to what's going on? Are there subscriptions that I'm paying out for that I can examine and look for? What do they contribute to my business? What do they contribute for my business? Do they support it? Do they save me time? Do they add to productivity? Do they make my life easier? Don't undervalue your own time. So if you've got a device, if you've got a piece of software, an application that actually cuts down the amount of time that you're spending, the amount of time your team is spending, you've got to factor that as a benefit against the actual cost. Now I'm going to then move on to other things in terms of the general thing about costs is, for most costs, there are two variables that you have to focus on. First of all, how much of that resource are you using? That's one perspective. And the second thing is, what's the price that you're paying for each unit of that particular resource? So let me give you an example. Now I'm going to focus for the latter part of this broadcast on energy costs. So typically electricity and gas. Now if we look at electricity, the cost of an electricity bill is made up in the main of three components. Component number one is the amount of electricity that's being consumed, and typically, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, that consumption, how much we're using, is measured in kilowatt hours. The next thing we have to consider is how much we as a business are paying to our electricity supplier for each kilowatt hour that's being consumed. Now, average rates for small businesses, certainly in the UK, by the way, an average business will consume in a year between 15 and 25,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. For gas, by the way, it's between 15 and 30,000 kilowatt hours. The average tariff rate for a kilowatt of electricity is about 44 pence per each kilowatt hour. So the first building block part of your energy bill is typically how much energy you're using multiplied by the tariff rate that you've got. Peculiarly, the sting and the tail also, though, you have what's called a flat rate standing charge. So irrespective of how much energy you're consuming, there will always be in the main what's called a standing charge element. And again, depending on who your suppliers are, they typically will base the standing charge on a flat consumption and amount per kilowatt hour. So that's the elements that you're looking at for a typical energy bill. So as we go forward, if we are going to make meaningful decisions here, there are two variables that we're going to look at. One is the rate per each kilowatt hour, and the second thing is the amount that we're consuming. Now, the way the energy industry, the energy environment is, it's going to be more difficult to perhaps negotiate and look at the tariff rate, the amount per kilowatt hour. And again, that's the thing that's really dramatically gone up. But what's within our control, what's within our remit, what we can actually do to have an impact, is looking at reducing the consumption, being energy efficient, for want of a better term. Now here's my advice about some of the headline things that we can do to tackle the energy costs that we are facing. Option one, you can always look in terms of what I call switching suppliers. Now when you are looking to switch suppliers, take into account a supplier typically will want to bind you in for a long period of time, and I've seen evidence, and I've had it myself and clients of mine have had it as well, where a supplier will typically say a contract for 3 years. They will then express the 3 years is beneficial because it locks you against any uncertainty. Those prices are fixed. Obviously, if energy prices go down after a period of time, you're locked into that rate that you're paying. So what it comes down to is a degree of risk, and you're measuring the risk and how much certainty you want in your planning. Now again, it's purely a personal preference. I again think of a personal perspective that I think energy rates will start to move downwards after about 1.5 years, 2 years, if not sooner. I think personally speaking 3 years is a longer landscape. I have no inside information, by the way, to OPEC, to any of the energy distribution companies and the supply companies here, but that's my personal take on that. However, if you're a business that actually has got a risk appetite that's quite modest, you don't want to face that risk of energy prices going up and up, you may look to a longer term contract. You may be somebody who's more relaxed with a shorter term contract. But whatever you do here, examine the clause, the terms of the contract. There are companies out there, and your inbox, by the way, is likely to be flooded with people now from energy companies looking to encourage you to switch suppliers. Before you make that leap, you need to make sure you do your due diligence. You need to make sure you know what the nature of the contract is, and it may be such that you might want to do your own homework as well. So switching suppliers is certainly one route. Number two is effectively you can do some what I call internal things to actually reduce the consumption. Now, step one for me, before you make any key decisions about what to do, whether to replace things, is to do what I call an energy audit. Now, an energy audit, you've got two options here. You can either bring in somebody from outside, an expert, somebody who's very used to doing energy audits. And an energy audit typically involves looking at your building, looking at your setup, looking at the equipment that you're using, having a walk round, looking at how the radiators are set up, looking at any ventilation that you've got going on, and examining their efficiency, their age, their condition, and actually doing effectively an assessment of what's going on in terms of energy consumption within your own business environment. Obviously, if you've got a number of disparate outlets here, then that will extend beyond that. The good news is, folks, if you check out, and I'll leave some links later on after the broadcast, there are some grants, there are some fundings available whereby you can access some financial support to do an energy assessment and energy audit. So I would certainly check out your local authority website. I would check out HMRC site. Again, I'll leave you a couple of links after the show. Is check out if there's any funding available, and you may find it a good use of your time to bring in an expert to do that energy assessment, that energy audit. There's no harm in you doing a quick walkthrough yourself. So go things and have a look in terms of your heating system, your air conditioning system. Is it set up correctly? If you've got it thermostatically controlled, a 1 degree change in the thermostat has about an 8 to 10% impact on the consumption of energy you have as well. You can do an assessment on the equipment, its age, its condition, its energy consumption. Are any things blocking the vents and all the rest of it? Therefore, that appliance has got to work much harder. So again, a quick walkthrough, a quick assessment is going to be really beneficial. What else can we do? Well, other things that we can also look at to actually have an impact on the energy consumption is the little things. And for me, I'm a big believer that little small steps that we take accumulate and compound to a big impact there as well. So if you've got the mindset, you look at something, you think, okay, for example, turning off lights, logging off the computer, brackets turning off the screens, that will save some energy. Typically, turning off the computer screen, by the way, will save you on average about £35 per computer screen. If you've got an office that's got, say, about 10 screens, and a lot of us have double screens these days, so if you've got a typical office, you've got 8 personnel there, each one's got a double screen, that's 60, that's £400 saving. That's £400 over a year, and think to yourself, how much do you have to generate by way of sales to give yourself £400 worth of profit? Typically, if I imagine something such as an office, you might actually have to generate, for example, £1,000 worth of sales in order to give yourself a £400 profit margin. So whatever your relationship is, remember, you're looking at small steps that you can make more immediately, which will compound and accumulate to an impact on your bottom line. And that relieves some of the pressure cooker off your finances as well, which is really what we're after. Behavior. So again, if you've got a team, encouraging them to think about ways to reduce energy, so like turning off the lights when they're not needed. Again, we might think, well, it's only a light switch, what does it do? But again, it accumulates. Now, if you're looking to replace, if you've got inefficient equipment, again, there are some grants, there is some funding out there that will help you. Again, check out your local authority website, check out your LEP, check out what funding is there available. Even if there isn't a funding, what you've got to bear in mind is when you look to replacement items, you must have what's called a business case for it. So again, investing something of several £1,000s, which is only going to save you a modest amount of money, may not necessarily be the best use of that investment, that best use of resources. So let's summarise what we've got so far. So we're talking about energy, we're talking about consumption, we're talking about what we can do. We need to do an audit and find out what's going on. We have to look about how we're using that equipment, how we're using those things in our office, in our business environment. Can we be more efficient in terms of turning computer screens off, turning lights off, looking at the type of equipment we've got, finding out the items that are consuming a large disproportionate amount of energy. It's about patterns of behaviour, becoming more disciplined. Making small changes here and there will accumulate to a big impact. Switching suppliers obviously is a very good thing. Fundamentally, whatever we decide to do, we need to have that financial plan that encapsulates and captures the route forward. What I would certainly recommend is do not wait for that business crisis to overtake you. Do not panic. Do maintain some resilience here. As business owners, you will see in your business life when things are very calm and very settled. You'll see things when they hit the fan. You'll see things times of prosperity. Business goes in cycles, and we as business owners need to make sure we've got that tuned in. We need to make sure we've got a good business route map. We need to look ahead in our business. We need to do a cash flow plan that reflects what's going on. We can see the impact on our decision making, and we can make more meaningful decisions, and we can lessen the anxiety that we're likely to be exposed to. Folks, I hope you got some value from this short broadcast. Let me know what your thoughts are. And what I would certainly say is I'll drop some links into the notes at the end. Be resilient, be calm, deal with this business crisis. At this moment in time, there doesn't look to be a great deal of government support coming out. We talk about cutting taxes and all the rest of it, but personally speaking, that's going to make a marginal impact in terms of where the cost pressures actually are. It's the costs that we need to face, and we need to effectively make sure we address them, not hide under that duvet and not ignore them either. We're going to take action, we're going to be resilient, and who knows, the cavalry of business support may come and help us. But in the meantime, remember, we are the masters of our own destiny. So good luck, folks, and don't have nightmares, as they would say.